and welcome to 20 Years with Maestro Conlon, a behind-the-curtain miniseries with James Conlon, commemorating this, his culminating season as music director at LA Opera, after which he becomes conductor laureate. On this episode, a cornucopia of Italian opera, we're going to be looking back at some of his memorable productions of the past 20 years, and we'll look forward to the current season with irresistible La Bohème upon us and Verdi's last great masterpiece for the stage, Falstaff, coming round the bend. We'll also discuss Maestro Conlon's legacy as it pertains to the full gamut of Italian opera at LA Opera and beyond. I'm your host, Gail Eichenthal. Hello, Maestro.
Hello, Gail. Nice to be with you.
There could hardly be a richer topic to talk about your legacy at LA Opera than Italian opera, and it goes way back to your first season and a work, La Traviata, that played quite a bit of role in your history with opera.
Well, my first weekend was very Verdian here in LA Opera. La Traviata, I think, on Friday, and Don Carlo on Saturday. That was a great way to start. Verdi goes back to the beginning of my awareness of my love for classical music, period. So it's not only saying, well, when did you learn to love Verdi? When did you learn to love opera? When did you learn to love Italian opera? It all came because of a performance of La Traviata, which I had seen. But it could have been anything. That just happened to be what set it all in motion.
And your origin story as an opera conductor also includes some of this repertoire. And we did touch on that on our first episode, but I think it bears repeating.
As I started conducting, and I didn't think of myself, nor do I still think of myself as an opera conductor, I'm a conductor who conducts operas. In fact, the first opera I conducted was not Italian at all. It was Boris Godunov by Mussorgsky. That's because I was an assistant in Spoleto Festival, the original Spoleto in Italy, and that was a great happenstance. But soon after that, I took over a production of La Bohème at the Juilliard School when Thomas Shippers, who of course was one of the great conductors of his time, bowed out for some health reasons, and the Juilliard School needed a conductor, and they couldn't find one of his stature. There weren't many to begin with, and eventually decided, having heard that I had conducted Boris Godunov in Spoleto, they thought, well, maybe they'll take a chance on me, and so they did. Maria Callas played a role in recommending me because that was the year she was at Juilliard doing her master classes. And so she recommended me to the president and said, take him, he's going to have a great future, which I'm very grateful to her. And that was my first opera, La Bohème. So we're going to be talking about La Bohème. That was their first opera I conducted. And then several months later, I actually conducted for the first time, it was actually paid for it, which was Falstaff at the Central City Opera. And so Falstaff and Bohème were the first Verdi and the first Puccini that I conducted. And they've been with me all my life.
This question is perhaps a bit of a cliche, but I cannot help asking it, so forgive me. What do you think Maria Callas saw in you as a student that inspired her to recommend you and say what she said?
You know, I'm the last person you can probably get an answer out of, because what do I know? I mean, I was conducting a rehearsal because they needed someone to rehearse while they were looking for a conductor. And I was the only conducting student there who knew any operas at all, frankly. And so they drummed me into service, and I think she came into a rehearsal and she could see how I was handling all the singers and coordinating everything. And, she'd seen a conductor or two in her life, and I think she knew what she liked and what she didn't, or what she thought was good and what she didn't. And so she formed a judgment. Whatever that was, it turned out well for me.
We'll get to La Bohème coming up later this season and Verdi's Falstaff shortly, but I'd love to take a glance back at some of the Italian operas that you've brought us over the past 20 years. Gaetano Donizetti has played a big role with The Elixir of Love, Lucia, and the company also produced Roberto Devera, moments before the COVID lockdown. Also, of course, Rossini, The Barber of Seville, and a glorious discovery for many, La Cenerentola. Both composers are associated, if I'm not wrong, with the idea of bel canto. And that is a phrase I have found for myself a little hard to get my head around. If you're not a musicologist or a serious aficionado, it means something like beautiful singing, which could be a description of any opera. So what is bel canto to you?
Well, it should be a description of any opera, but it isn't. Bel canto with a capital B and a capital C refers very specifically to a period of Italian opera in the first half of the 19th century. And we generally associate that with Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti. They were the bel canto, they were the core of bel canto composers. Not the only ones, but a culmination. But bel canto with a small b and a small c simply means, as you said, beautiful singing. And it's associated with a tradition of how to make one's voice mellifluous, a certain amount of fluidity, a certain amount of dexterity. How do you sing quickly and lightly? How do you sing high notes beautifully? All of those concepts of what makes it beautiful to listen to a person sing. That's a very general term. And so, in fact, if you're listening to a Mozart opera, they should be singing beautifully. So you can say, well, that's bel canto. And if you're listening to Verdi, it's still bel canto with a small b and a small c. It ought to be bel canto to listen to a Wagner opera. It isn't always. But the opera is a form that is based on a vocal virtuosity that is pleasing to the ear. That's why as opposed to shouting, screaming, hollering, or any other number of things.
Well, certainly the operas of Donizetti and Rossini are full of such beautiful melodies, a constant flow of beautiful melodies. And just touching first on Rossini, who lived to be 76, he wasn't writing operas in the last couple of decades, but he managed to write, as I understand it, some 39 operas completed when he was under 40 years old. How is that possible? He didn't start at age 5. He was so prolific.
He was prolific. He was fast. He was a businessman. He understood what a commission meant. If he got a commission, he made sure it was ready on time. He was amazingly prolific, and yet one of the great ironies is that he had seemingly totally exhausted himself in the middle of his life, and he stopped writing and spent his years very active in Parisian social life and musical life, cultural life, but he didn't produce any more operas. Produced one great Stabat Mater for chorus and orchestra, some pieces for piano, a mystery, but he just was tired and stopped.
Well, he did an awful lot before he got tired, and that includes La Cenerentola, I mentioned. I think for a lot of the LA Opera audience, that was really a joyous discovery. It's not as often performed as Barber is from the second performance ever. What brought you to bringing La Cenerentola here?
Well, La Cenerentola is Cinderella. That's what that is in Italian. And of course, a very popular fairy tale. We all know it. It comes in many forms. We also brought the Turk in Italy. To me, it became very important at a certain point to see to it that the company as a company and the orchestra as an orchestra could effectively perform any of the bel canto operas. And why I say it's important, playing those operas for an orchestra is a little bit like playing Haydn and Mozart. Very demanding on the discipline of the orchestra because you cannot hide anything. You can't fake your way through it. If you make a mistake, it's heard. And the art of conducting them is, of course, brilliance and lightness, clarity. All those things that are demanded of the conductor are demanded of the orchestra. And so collectively, it's a very important part of any opera house. And of course, the ability to sing those, be they comic operas or be they melodramas, very important piece of culture. And frankly, to understand Verdi, who of course is the apex of Italian opera, he came right out of the bel canto tradition, and his early operas reflect all of those values, with a twist that from the very, very beginning, he was more determined to make a dramatic point and to start to alter the conventions and the expectations of the bel canto operas. But Rossini is fundamental. He's really the father or the grandfather of them all.
Very memorable performance in 2015 of Barbara of Seville as part of your season-long Figaro Unbound tribute. How did that come about?
I can't remember when or where the idea came about, and I'm sure Christopher Kirsch had a lot to do with that because he was very keen on it. So Figaro is a character created by a French playwright whose name is Beaumarchais, who was actually the son of a Swiss or a French from near Switzerland watchmaker, and his name was Caron. And so he created a character, Figaro, which is made out of fils de Caron, son of Caron, and he created an autobiographical character that stars in 3 of his stage works called the Figaro Trilogy, the Barbara of Seville first, the Marriage of Figaro second, and then the third of which was called La Mère Coupable, the Guilty Mother. Now, we performed on the main stage the Barbara of Seville and the Marriage of Figaro. There exist operatic renditions of La Mère Coupable, but they've never been terribly successful. And once again, a commission was given to John Corigliano to do one at the Met. And in the end, he opted to use it as a point of departure, but he said, you know what, it needs other things that don't work. So he created this great, vast tapestry with including the characters of Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI and the Revolution. Beaumarchais is in the opera himself. Figaro, all the characters are there. And it is a delightful, delightful opera. And I must say, one of the most memorable productions by Darko Trezniak that we did in all those years. So I enjoyed that very much. And as an extra bonus, I did a performance of an opera I love very much and have done very rarely, which is the Barbara of Seville by Giovanni Paisiello, which preceded not just Rossini, but it preceded Mozart. I mean, Mozart, Paisiello was a master when Mozart was young. And Mozart knew the Barbara of Seville by Paisiello. And we can see the influence of that in the Marriage of Figaro. So we got a chance to do that with our young singers. It was a great year for people who liked Figaro, the character, Beaumarchais, the playwright.
And a shout out to my alma mater, UCLA, for taking on Mercadante's The Two Figaros during that festival, not frequently performed.
No, not at all. And Mercadante was, of course, a very important composer and a very good composer. And I was very happy that they did that. I saw it. And it's worthy, it's seaworthy, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Well, another great opera composer whose music you have highlighted in your time here, Donizetti. Talk about prolific. He wrote close to 70 operas by the time of his death at age 50. I mean, can we even fathom such productivity? I'm sure they're not all the elixir of love, but still.
Well, so I think it's 72 operas, pretty impressive at any age. But that's the way life was. That's the way composers composed. And, of course, they had shorter lives. And I think that they were aware of the pressure of time in a way that probably we're not today. And most of those operas were melodramas. He wrote very few comedies. And yet when he did write comedies, The Elixir of Love, Don Pasquale, The Daughter of the Regiment, they're highly successful.
When we talk about LA Opera and your legacy with Italian opera here, Verdi stands tall. We talked about it being the first composer that you represented from Italian opera back in 2006. And I understand, is this right, more than 500 performances you've done worldwide of Verdi?
Yes, it is right. I passed that in 2019, so that's up much closer to, I don't know, 550 now. But many of those performances have been here at LA Opera.
So if you can sort of sum it up, what drives your passion for Verdi?
I feel I can't live without Verdi. Maybe partially because my first acquaintance with classical music was Verdi. I can't conceive of classical music without thinking of Verdi. And having gone back over and over and over again to these works, not just to conduct them, but also to love them and to join them. And I'm actually adding one next season, not here, but in Europe, that I haven't done yet. So I'm up to about 16 or 17 of the 26 operas. There are a lot of operas, there's a sort of early period that, he churned them out. He used to call them his galley years, and he would churn them out quickly, which don't get performed very often. And not every one of them is a masterpiece, but okay, they're still Verdi. I keep coming back also to the human being because of the composers whose lives and personalities attract me and interest me. He certainly is a very important one, as Mozart is. And these are men who had a very highly developed sense of humanity and their obligations to humanity. Now, you can read all about how Verdi was irascible and difficult, and he probably was. You don't read that too much about Mozart. I mean, one gets a very positive feeling about the person Mozart. But I also believe that there was something deeply human about Verdi, and part of that was, I think, his origins of his life and his birth. He was born into a poor house. I went back this year to conduct for the first time in Busseto, the little city where he first studied music, and he was born 6 or 7 kilometers in a house that his family, many children, shared with animals. It's very moving to see Verdi's birthplace, which is a very humble house, sort of on a crossroads, a place called Les Roncolets. And all there is his house, a few other houses, a church where he was baptized and where he later played the organ. I visited it several times, including just in this past spring when I conducted a concert in the theater, in the Teatro Verdi in Busseto. And I had one very dramatic experience, which was in January. I was conducting in Parma, and I remember getting lost in the mist because it was so thick that you could not see 2 feet in front of you. And in fact, I called one of my colleagues here in LA on my phone and said, "Do you have a GPS? Can you help me? I can't find my hotel." Now, I also saw that around Verdi's house, which I visited on a subsequent day. And this so profoundly affected me because, we all have this sort of cliche vision of Italy, all, sunshine, palm trees in the south and lightness. And we forget that the north of Italy is cold, dark, covered with fog and mist winter, and it's a very hard existence. And Verdi was born into that. And I think this deeply informed his humanity. This is a man who always kept his connection to the earth. He was a farmer. He kept his farm to the earth. He was connected into, let's say, put it in a very prosaic way, he had his feet on the ground. He never lost that. He never became impressed with the glitter of, in fact, he was rather suspicious of it all. He was basically, in his personality, a farmer and a human being who happened to write music.
Later in the season, we'll be treated to Verdi's final operatic masterpiece. Tell us what drew you to programming Falstaff toward the end of your final season as music director here.
I chose Falstaff, which is Verdi's last work, and the Magic Flute, which is Mozart's last work. And for our gala concert, we're going to do big excerpts of Mozart, Verdi, and Wagner, because I think those are the 3 pillars, or should be the 3 pillars of any opera house, and 3 that I have tried to defend in my years here in Los Angeles Opera. So that's an expression of my first belief in the primacy of their presence as composers in any opera house, including ours in Los Angeles, but also my wanting to say farewell or goodbye, or with those final works. The Magic Flute doesn't feel like a final work. It wasn't meant to be a final work. I mean, I do not believe he knew that he was going to die shortly thereafter. So there's no sign of it. But Falstaff is definitely an autumnal work. It is he was 80 when he wrote it. He wrote it because he had an inner need to prove to himself, probably, that he could write a comedy successfully, because he had only written one and it was not a success. And that always bothered him. And that he could turn, because he always loved Shakespeare. Anytime he could do anything having to do with Shakespeare, he did. And so turning in what is, I think by most Shakespeare scholars' admission, not the greatest Shakespeare play. In fact, some people don't even think he wrote it. Turning it into something better than the play, turning it into an opera, which is clearly one of the most perfect operas, most perfect masterpieces, that even people who don't particularly like opera recognize it as such, along with Otello.
It's just brimming with humor and joy, and anyone can pick up on that. You don't have to speak the language. It's just full of delight.
Well, it goes by at the speed of light. It's people say, "Well, where are the melodies?" Well, they're all there. You just gotta hang on and hear them. I mean, they come and go very, very, very quickly. Amazingly witty, and also an ironic work where he chooses self-citation. He almost takes quotes or similarities with operas that he's written to satirize himself and to say, well, this is what I used to do in melodramas. Here it is now in a comic context. So it's a self-referential work, and as such, for anybody who loves the rest of Verdi, it's essential.
Well, over the years, you've brought us a very rich sampling of Verdi, and one memorable production was, again, an opera that those of us who are not necessarily aficionados, for whom it was a huge discovery, and that is Don Carlo, also marked near the beginning of your tenure. What decided you that Don Carlo should be heard in L.A.?
Well, I think it should be heard everywhere. It's very hard to pick out the greatest operas of Verdi, but Don Carlo is certainly one of them. Just in terms of its majesty and its dimensions. It's a story about King Potentate Philip II of Spain at the height of the Spanish Empire, and a personal drama woven around that with his French wife, Elisabetta, the Grand Inquisitor and the Grand Inquisition, political ideas as expressed by Friedrich Schiller. I mean, this is based on a Schiller play. It comes, shall we say, with a very rich dowry, coming out of Schiller and coming out of a enormous personality in Western history. And it is an absolute masterpiece. Should be everywhere all the time. And we've been able to do it twice, which I'm glad about.
And then Nabucco, which I don't believe had been performed in Los Angeles, certainly on that scale. And that was an earlier work.
Nabucco was his third work, and was actually the work that really launched his career. It was a great success. The famous chorus, Va Pensiero, Go, Thoughts on Wings of Golden Wings, which is the lament of the Hebrews on the banks of the river Jordan, when they lament their exile from their homelands. Now, whether or not it was Verdi's intention, subsequently it has been read into the political situation, because, of course, much of northern Italy was under foreign domination, in that case, the Austrians. And so it is said to have been understood as the lament for the Italian people who were under the yoke of a foreign government. Anyway, it became close to being the national anthem. Literally, in recent years, I mean, there's regularly a movement to make it the national anthem of Italy. Every Italian knows it. Every Italian sings it. It's worked its way into the basic culture.
A couple of years ago, 2022, you brought back Otello to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, the first opera ever performed by the company in its inaugural season in 1986. And in some ways, this late opera kind of exemplifies what you said about a composer taking off from bel canto and so deepening the sense of drama.
Well, of course, by the time he writes Otello, which is his penultimate opera, he has accomplished that. The roots about the singing of bel canto are still present. But now, no bar of music is not thoroughly grounded in the drama, the story, the text. Nothing is there as a vehicle to show off vocal acrobatics. Nothing is left at all of the sense of virtuosity of the bel canto years. Now it's all 100% about the drama. And so he grew with his own concepts. Operas which don't stop, an act at a time. The unit is no longer the aria or the duet. The unit is the act. 4 acts, they start, they go to the end. So many of the innovations that he had been working on very gradually have come to full fruition in Otello and in Falstaff.
As we look toward the spring performances of Falstaff toward the end of your 20th and final season, is there a recording that you might recommend to audiences who haven't familiarized themselves with the music?
Well, there are many good recordings of Falstaff, but there are historic conductors that are very important, and most of all is Arturo Toscanini, who, of course, was old enough to have played under Verdi's direction. Otello, his first opera he conducted was Aida. He knew Falstaff and defended Falstaff his entire life. So either of the recordings of Toscanini, I think, are historically very, very, very important. But there are many. It's very hard to pick out a favorite, and they're very different. Herbert von Karajan's Falstaff, very different, but also great. There's no shortage of great Falstaffs.
The Karajan recording features Tito Gobi as Falstaff, Elizabeth Schwarzkopf as Alice Ford. You can't go wrong with that cast, I guess.
Well, there's the rest of the cast as well, so yeah. It's an ensemble opera. That's very important. Yes, Falstaff is the leading character, and Alice Ford is the leading woman of the 4, the merry wives of Windsor, which is what they are. But it's an ensemble opera, intricate interplay of voices and characters from beginning to end.
Of course, Verdi is not the only great 19th century, early 20th century Italian composer represented this season. We have the heartbreaking La Bohème by Puccini. What place does Bohème hold in your heart?
A very special place, but again, for different reasons. La Bohème was the first opera in which I appeared professionally in the children's chorus, and I was that little boy who wails that he wants a trumpet in the second act. That was my debut on the operatic stage at the age of 12. I remember one of the singers said to my mother, "You know what? This little boy, he's going to have Bohème in his soul all his life." And that, of course, is absolutely true. So Bohème was, again, it was one of those fundamental steps in my own development. As I retold the story about Juilliard, it represented the first opera that I conducted. The second opera that I conducted, but the first, that was my New York debut. That's what launched my professional life. And subsequently over the years, I made a movie of it. When I returned to the Paris Opera's music director or as principal conductor, La Bohème was the work I chose. So Bohème's been with me on significant occasions all of my life. But what is it really? It's one of the handful of Puccini operas that can be argued are perfect operas, that from beginning to end, there is not a note of music that is superfluous, and there is nothing missing. It's very succinct, very dramatic, very coherent. One of the three. I mean, if I would have to say, the three are Bohème, Tosca, and Butterfly that get it all right. Now, if you go into the details, you can always make critiques of things, but that period, middle period for Puccini, in a certain way, there was a type of equilibrium.
I think it's almost guaranteed to make an opera lover out of somebody who thinks they don't like opera. Like you say, not a note, too many, and also the most incredibly beautiful melodic lines from the first note to the last.
Well, it's called a tearjerker for a reason. It makes people cry. Yes, it's a tragedy or a melodrama. It is. And that's part of what the Greeks told us we go to the theater for, to get it out of our systems. So we do cry. Cathartic. Bohème is always cathartic. It's very hard to remain unmoved at the end of La Bohème. And I would say to anybody who has never seen it, it's a must.
Any La Bohème recordings that you can recommend to our audience?
Yes. Again, I draw attention to Arturo Toscanini's recording. Now, he conducted the premiere in Torino, so he knew La Bohème. And even though it's a late recording, which means Toscanini, who conducted faster and faster as he got older, it's very fast by what we're used to, but it's certainly worth hearing. I would say the great mimis to be heard are Maria Callas, Renata Tebaldi, Mirella Freni. Those are for me, the great. And the tenor is just as important because, yes, Placido Domingo, Luciano Pavarotti, certainly Jussi Björling, Franco Corelli. These are all great, 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 great tenors, all worth hearing in La Bohème.
And I do think familiarizing oneself with the music only enhances being there live.
Well, the great thing about classical music is it gets better on every hearing. So the more you hear it, the more you're going to love it.
When we think about the symphony, Italian composers don't spring to mind as the kind of legacy of the Viennese composers, for example. Yet in opera, it's as good as it gets. No one would argue that. Why do you think Italy had this supremacy in opera?
For several reasons. First of all, it was created in Italy. It is an Italian form of art. It comes out of Florence, the Renaissance Florence. It is an Italian product. By the way, most of music that we know is originally something Italian. The instruments, the names, the language, the solfege, you name it, it was Italian. Now, when it moved northward, the Germans took it, developed it, the French took it, the British produced it. All sorts of things happened, but most things did start in Italy, and opera without a question. Also because Italian is the language that lends itself best to all the concepts of beautiful singing that we discuss when we discuss bel canto. It is the operatic language. It's not an accident because of the way the vowels are long, because the way the consonants are short and subtle. So all of that, those are all the reasons why we based the opera out of Italy, and it started out of Italy, grew out of Italy. Now, why didn't they write symphonies as much? A lot of it was public taste. For Italians, theater was their main form of entertainment, and the opera was their main form of theater. So all the way through the 19th century, that's what most Italians were going to do, and therefore the taste for those opera and the need to fulfill the demand for operas, that was the life of Donizetti, Bellini, Rossini, Verdi, Puccini. It wasn't that they never wrote any orchestral music. They did, but always fewer pieces than the operas because the demand was for something else. Now, you'll find Germans, Brahms, Bruckner, even Mahler, who conducted so many operas, never wrote an opera. So, a lot of it is what's expected or what is playing into a a local industry. Italy, there was no industry for symphony music. And there was even suspicion of symphonic music when it started arriving in the Wagnerian years and, in the 19th century.
Talk about supply and demand. This is demand and supply, in a way, of operas.
Well, in those cases, yeah.
Is there any truth to the rumor that they had to lock Rossini in a room to get the overture because the opera was about to be premiered?
I don't know why I wasn't there. It's one of those stories that they tell.
It's a great story.
Yeah, because he was also very lazy. He was famously lazy, and it was said that if he was writing something and the manuscript fell on the floor, rather than to pick it up and continue it, he would just write another one. And he was so prolific.
On that note, I want to, before we conclude, I do want to congratulate you on some great news that came to us at the beginning of October. Music restored the Conlon Center for Exiled and Suppressed Composers, which is a latest incarnation and a great expansion of the Recovered Voices project, which was really one of the hallmarks of your tenure here. This must be so wonderful for you to know that it has this great new home.
Yes, it's very important to me because through the collaboration with the Colburn School, I'm given an opportunity to, first of all, to expand our activities, but also to start to prepare the next generation of musicians who will carry this on for me and to, literally prepare a successor for myself, because the need to promote this music, which is neglected, will outlast my lifetime and must continue and has to continue. So I now have an opportunity, to which I'm very grateful to the Colburn School and to Cel Cardin. We're going to be able to expand that both in terms of performances, but also in terms of our work on the website. More writings or more articles on more composers in order to become a real center, and that's where we are now, a center, where people can refer to us online or in person as time goes on.
Fantastic development. And stay tuned to our podcast series for some more details on this wonderful new project based at the Colburn School, Music Restored, the Conlon Center for Exiled and Suppressed Composers. That's coming up in June of next year. You've been listening to 20 Years with Maestro Conlon. Thank you for joining us here on Behind the Curtain. And Maestro, it's always such a pleasure. I learned so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Gail.